Hi, my name is Terry Bates. I'm director of the Cornell Lake Erie Research and Extension Program, and welcome to our next LERGP video blog. Today I am here with Rhiann Jakubowski, who is a research aide in our program and has been working on the precision viticulture project for several years now. Rhiann has a background in environmental science and GIS programs, and her position here on the project is to process all the spatial data that we collect out in the field. So it is, as one staff member here calls what happens, the data goes into Rhiann's office and magic happens and we get the maps back. So I think in this very quick blog, we're going to try to demystify what happens with Rhiann and her data processing and how we want to automate that as we go down the road with the SERI project. So Rhiann, okay. As a grower or as a researcher, I go out in the field and I collect spatial data with either soil sensors or canopy sensors and crop sensors. And so essentially I get this big data file that has geo coordinates, XY coordinates, and then the data, like what an NDVI value is. And then it comes to your office. So start talking to me about what you do with that data when you get that raw data file.
Okay, so the raw data is pretty messy when it comes in. So you have values outside of your vineyard boundaries where you were driving your tractor, turned around. So the very fundamental part is that it goes into the GIS program and gets clipped to the boundaries of your vineyards, which those boundaries have been established in the past several years through the project that I started here with, which was drawing the polygons around all the vineyard blocks. So once those boundaries are taken out, it follows up by some simple trimming and clipping, which is taking out crazy outliers or any erroneous data.
So as I'm driving down the farm road going to my vineyard block, I have my tractors on and the power is going to the sensor and it's collecting data that whole time, and that's just going to screw me up. So I don't want any of that data.
So that data is taken out at the very beginning stage. So once it's all cleaned up and trimmed, you're going to get usually this nice bell-shaped curve of data. And if you don't, 9 times out of 10 you will. But and then it runs through this kriging program, which is it's called, the program's called Vesper, and kriging is basically just a smoothing out process. So the raw data will have like a really low NDVI value next to a really high, next to some mediums, next to a low. And you want to kind of take that and average it out, because we're not looking to do precision viticulture vine to vine. It's more of a bigger zone. So by kriging it, you're creating this more smoothed out map instead of these little pits of...
So if you just plot the raw data and assign colors to the different data, what does that map look like?
A bunch of randomly colored dots.
So by smoothing the data, you're trying to see what the underlying pattern is in the vineyard that is causing vines over here to be, say, a little bit bigger and ones over here to be a little bit smaller.
It makes some more, it kind of averages out smaller sections and makes a more general map than, little pieces of low data next to high data, which isn't really effective when you're trying to manage a vineyard.
Okay, so... So you get this cleaned up data, and you've gone through some kind of processing to smooth the data and try to look at the underlying. So tell me about like different maps. Like, how do you compare different maps? Like, if I go and I collect canopy in year 1, and then I turn around and try to collect canopy growth in year 2, and I want to look at those maps, what's the difference?
So when it runs through this kriging process, you use a grid file, which is basically just X and Y coordinates. But the grid file is really important because if you use the same grid file for every data that you collect and process, you now assign NDVI in 2015, 2016, 2017, as well as any soil or yield data. You're assigning all of that data to one specific point every single time. So instead of, so now we can go back and look at the statistical differences between NDVI in year 1 and NDVI in year 2 to see if that pattern is continuing throughout years or if it's changing over the years. So that common grid file is really important, and that's kind of what sets aside the Vesper Kriging program, aside from any of the off-the-shelf ag leader or Trimble units.
So to put that in say grower terms, say I have a vineyard and I'm at a 9x9 vine spacing. We typically make our grid a 9x9 vine spacing, and then as we collect that data, we may have a 10-acre block and we collect 80,000 data points, and then when Rhiann goes through that whole cleaning and smoothing process, data is projected to that 9x9 grid. And so I can, whatever data we collect, whether it's canopy several times throughout the year or between years, yield, soil, whatever, if all the data is projected to that same common grid, we can start to do statistical analysis on it.
And then your statistical analysis will lead into making those management zones after you have several layers of data built up and layered on top of each other.
All right. We'll talk about management zones in another podcast. So if anybody has any questions, you can email the LERGP website, or if you have questions for a podcast, you can leave that in the comments section as well.
Thanks.